Are you familiar with FBI Special Agents Kyle Seraphin?
I'm familiar with the name.
Is that yes?
I'm familiar with the name. Familiar with the name. Familiar with the name.
Let's bring in Kyle Seraphin. He's the FBI whistleblower who helped expose government censorship of our First Amendment rights.
Now, we only have this memo because a recently suspended FBI agent called Kyle Seraphin brought it to the public. We're grateful that he did. Kyle, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
He's the host of something that strangely is called the Kyle Seraphin Show.
Kyle Seraphin, I can't thank you enough for speaking out. I knew you guys were out there, and I knew it was just a matter of time, but you got a lot of guts putting your face and your name to this. You're doing a service on behalf of the American people, and from the bottom of my cracked and broken heart sometimes, thank you very much.
Take a look behind the curtain with a real whistleblower and American patriot. Prepare to embrace the uncomfortable truth because this program has no time for comforting lies. Here is civil liberties enthusiast, Second Amendment defender, and recovering FBI agent Kyle Seraphin.
Well, hello, my friends, and welcome to the Kyle Seraphin Show. Today is Thursday. It is April the 18th. And we are rolling live on rumble.com/Kyle Seraphin. Join us over there if you like to get into the live chat. It is already bumping, and you guys can hit the like button. You can subscribe to the channel if you so choose. You can support us if you want to. You hit the follow button, and then you get a secondary option only on a PC or only if you're in a web browser. I don't know why Rumble rocks like that, but that is how they do it. Folks, we got a very special guest today. I hope you guys are going to appreciate it as much as I appreciate him giving us the time. A man who is in the running for Catholic Hero of the Year. We're going to run our ad reads up front because I'm the boss and this is my show and I do it how I like it. And mostly we don't have to answer to anybody. We're going to do that real quick and then we're going to jump into a conversation with Rob Green, who is not representing DOD or the Department of the Navy. He is a man in his own personal capacity talking about some things that are a big deal. And I think you're going to find another suspendable. So that's good stuff. Let's start off with our friends over at Patriot Cooler. It's patriotcooler.com. That's where you go to get your own version. Look at this one. This one's got decorations. This is one of my buddies over at the Department of the Air Force. Yes, I got called a white supremacist for having an AFSOC sticker in a briefing. I don't know. You guys can get your own. patriotcoolers.com. Promo code Kyle will save you 10%. Promo code Kyle, K-Y-L-E, will save you that 10% on Patriot Coolers. If you spend $50 or more, you get free shipping. That's good to go. Easy stuff. You guys can support a sponsor that supports us. Don't buy it if you don't need it. Don't buy it if you can't afford it. But if you want to, and you want to go out there and take care of the folks that are taking care of us, that's where you do it. patriotcoolers.com, Houston, Texas. Good people. We appreciate them. Let's also talk about preparing yourself for God knows what's coming at you. And honestly, God knows what's coming at us. 4patriots.com/Kyle. That is our food survival supplier. The number 4, patriots.com/Kyle. You got two choices in life. You can prepare or repair, as I learned in the survival school. You can go for about 3 weeks without food, but you will be a grump and you will be a terrible father and a lousy husband and not a lot of fun to be around if you do not have some calories in reserve. You guys can do up to 72 hours just to throw in your car, quick grab and go, or you can go 3 months, 6 months, a year, prepare yourself out. They've also got all kinds of little gadgets and gizmos, which is fun. Yeah, we like that kind of stuff. 4patriots.com/Kyle to prepare, lest you be caught trying to repair. Far more expensive. Who knows how many American dollars, what does my buddy always call them? Federal Reserve notes you'd have to put into a wheelbarrow at some point when our hyperinflation goes. Get yourself squared away for that. And last but not least, our dear friends over at The Catholic Vote. Today is not going to be a news-based story. We're going to be talking about people. We're going to be talking about what happens, not what happened. And if you guys want to go get the loop, you can go to catholicvote.org. Click on the center button right there that says loop me in with your email address, and you will get this, the loop, which has an article written by me in it today, of all things. I didn't even know they were putting that out, but they did. I helped write a book. I was in one of the chapters, and they released that, at least a piece of it, to the Federalist about the betrayal that the FBI has engaged in against Catholics. If you guys want to read about that, you can read about the Senate killing the Mayorkas impeachment. There's a story about a Jesuit university that was trying to put on drag shows, and they got on the wrong side of us. So there are over 13,000 people signing a petition on and on. Denver mayor trying to give millions to migrants, which we know are illegal immigrants, trying to give them while defunding the police. Good stories. Check out catholicvote.org. You guys are going to be missing out if you do not get the loop today. And that is it. That is all of the 20 minutes of sponsorships that we are alleged to do in our 40-minute podcast, which is obviously not that. Let's bring on our guest, and I want to show you up here. He is the author of Defending the Constitution Behind Enemy Lines, a story of hope for those who love liberty. You can follow him on social media at RobGreen1010. I'll have to ask him what the 1010 part means, but you can see there. And he's also the author of the Declaration of Military Accountability. My guest today is Commander Rob Green, who is in his personal capacity. That's right. How are we doing, sir?
Doing very well, Kyle. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks for being on with me. I'm going to call you Rob so we don't have any sort of issues with the Department of the Navy or lest anyone think you're representing something you're not. Is that cool with you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you reading the disclaimer up front. I typically don't do it. I had a PAO and a legal review at one point from a friend, and he said, you know what? You're so far off narrative. You don't have to worry. You know you don't speak for them. So when I am asked to say it, I typically say something along the lines of, yes, I don't speak for anybody who is a domestic enemy to the Constitution.
I like that. I like that a lot. Unfortunately, it seems like a lot of our government, a lot of our military has sort of stepped into that space, and a lot of people forgot that their oath was to the Constitution, not to their branch of service and not their government agency, huh? What a weird time to be alive. All right, Rob, I want to start with who you are, and then we'll get into what you've been doing and how you got there. So we'll just kind of take our time, if that's cool with you. I want to give you the floor. Tell people where you're from and how you describe yourself. Obviously, there's show notes if people want to read about it, but I'd like it in your own words.
Yeah, thank you. Navy commander, father of 7, traditional Catholic. And I mean, I would never, ever want to be in the public light, the public sphere. Certainly, never doing social media stuff. But I got into this fight when the Navy started trying to chase me down with a needle, with a biological agent that I don't need. And then I really started doing a bunch of research and realized, hey, we're breaking a couple laws here, and then went on the offensive as soon as we realized what this was doing to people and what it was doing to the Constitution that we swore an oath to defend, completely shredding it. And so that's how I got into this whole fight and why we're talking.
I appreciate that. Where did you grow up? Where are you from?
From Alabama originally, and then went to Ole Miss for a year, went to the Naval Academy after that. Met my wife. She's from Steubenville, Ohio. Her dad was in the administration at the university for like 30 years. So we met at a place called Catholic Family Land, Apostolate for Family Consecration up in Bloomingdale, Ohio. I had a break at the Naval Academy for a week, went and met my family up there. She was working there. And so we got married 2 days after graduation from the academy.
Okay, fair enough. That's a good origin story. And Alabama the Beautiful, right? That's the way they say it on the signs on the way in.
It is a very beautiful state, heart of Dixie.
I didn't know that when I first drove through Alabama. This was years ago. I think I was active duty. I think I was driving out to Fort Bragg, and I drove through it, and it said Alabama the Beautiful, and I went like, oh yeah, whatever. Everyone has a little catchphrase, and then it is a shockingly gorgeous state, especially when you go east to west and cross it, and you just go, man, there's some real beauty in this country. It's worth defending, it turns out.
It is. It's very hot down there, though.
Yeah. No, I can't do that anymore. I almost died of heat stroke when I was active duty, so I'm no longer doing the game of the American South. Okay. Do you want to say where you're currently stationed right now? Is that relevant to anything, or do you want to hide that?
Well, it doesn't matter. I mean, the ones who oppose what we're standing for, they all know where I live. So, as you obviously know, So I was in Newport, Rhode Island when everything went down. I was the executive officer of a 650-person unit up there. Got fired from that job and then exiled for 7 months. And eventually, when we started winning in court and they realized they can't court-martial me or kick me out involuntarily, they said, hey, we're going to have to put you back to work. So after 7 months of exile and no contact, where they probably hoped I would just go away, they said, hey, we're going to have to put you back to work, move me back to Virginia. And I'm in the Southern Virginia area now. Okay,
fair enough. No, that's good enough. I don't need you to get too specific, and there's no upside to that for anybody. Let's talk about your military career. You just talked about graduating, getting married. Obviously, you've got 7 kids, so they came spanner. What's your oldest and your youngest kid-wise?
Almost 16 down to 2.
Yeah, that's a big spread. That's a wild household, as you mentioned before we got started. Yes. I'm much more compact. I've got a 7-month-old right now who's trying to figure out how to walk, which scares me because right when they start getting mobile, that phase where it's like, oh boy. It's I always tell people it's like the Velociraptors being able to turn the handles in Jurassic Park, where you just suddenly are like, my wife and I kind of go wide-eyed and we're like, let's talk about where was your first command, kind of your movement through, and the reason I want to do that is I want to discuss My buddy Steve calls it the system idealist. The people who love the system tend to be the ones that do what you have done, step up and say, hey, I'm willing to lose my job over this because you actually believe in it. Let's talk about sort of how you progressed and where your commands were as an officer moving through the Navy.
Yeah, so I did a couple destroyer tours out of Norfolk. It was my very first commanding officer is now the Navy Inspector General, 3-star Admiral. I mention him in the book because I believe that Admiral John Fuller had a great opportunity to help stop some of this lawlessness. And, he defended the institution rather than the Constitution. So I talk a little bit about that. I went to a shore duty command after that. I was doing weapon systems testing for the Navy. Got a master's degree in operations research, a modeling and simulation master's certificate focused on data analytics, things like that. I did 5 years as a GS and a reservist in the Navy, and then eventually said, hey, I want to get back and lead. So I reactivated permanent active duty as a reserve management officer. And now that's where they sent me to Newport, Rhode Island, where I was the XO of a security squadron up there.
Talk about the culture that you saw and if it's evolved since you came in. I know it's always different when you're kind of a younger guy watching it, but as you've moved more senior in rank, what have you seen the evolution of our U.S. military?
It's interesting. We had almost no training on the Constitution. I mean, looking back on it, I didn't think it was a big deal, but we train on everything. There's annual training for, SAPR, sexual assault prevention and response, for insider threats and cybersecurity stuff, for suicide awareness. We train on everything every year. Big deal. But we don't train on the Constitution. And I found that odd at looking back in hindsight that I never experienced any of that. And as I've gone up in rank, it was always imparted on me, hey, you have more responsibility. And instead of pushing the Constitution, they were pushing the institution. We protect this house. It was sort of an NFL shield kind of thing. When I finally put on 05 commander in the Navy, it would be lieutenant colonel in the other branches. I was pulled aside by my 06, my captain, and he's mentioned to me, hey, you're now a senior officer in the Navy. You're a field grade officer. You're the lowest rank of senior officer. But you now have a huge responsibility to protect the institution. The institution comes first. I had a sidebar conversation with him. He pulled me aside and gave me that lecture, like, hey, now you protect the shield. And I can't think of anything that set us up more than this mindset from our senior leaders. And it's been decades in the making. We got into this problem over decades. We're not going to get out of it in a short period of time. It's going to take a while. But we're going to have to clean out the institutional rot that is protecting all of our institutions before they protect the principles that underline the Constitution. And that is where we're at. And we have that problem in the military. From your story, you have that problem from the FBI. We have that everywhere. It's the institution above the Constitution.
Do you think that it's because people don't know what's in the Constitution or what their role in defending the Constitution is? Because I see it goes both ways in the GS side, but I don't have any eyes on sort of the senior military end of it.
I think it's a little bit of both. They don't understand what's in it, but they don't understand the underlying principles either. So how you defend it from the military perspective, we all know a foreign adversary could come in and, overthrow our constitutional way of life, from an outside in sort of thing. That's what we're there to protect. Mm-hmm. It's the foreign threat, the foreign adversary, that kind of thing. But when we take our oath, we raise our right hand, we say, I swear to support and defend the Constitution. It's not just against the foreign enemy. It's all enemies, foreign and domestic, right? So I've talked about this before in other interviews, but the Constitution does two main things. It establishes the form of our government, but then it sets individual liberties, individual constitutional rights as having primacy over everything else. The Constitution is designed to protect individual rights, not protect the institution from individuals. So if you don't understand that it's individual rights that have primacy, then you're missing the point of the Constitution. There is no greater thing an American can do in defending the Constitution than defending individual constitutional rights. And so our senior military leaders have completely set that aside, and they only focus on foreign. And when they are asked to trample on individual rights, it's not a second thought for them because there's no risk to them. And so we have tried to impart some risk recently. And I wrote the Declaration of Military Accountability, and we have gone on the offensive a little bit in public speaking and those kinds of things. But until we hold somebody accountable for trampling the individual rights element, what they were supposed to defend, the domestic enemy, we're going to keep having this problem.
So, folks, you can find the military accountability link that is in the show description. You can find Rob's Twitter handle there as well, and you can click through and you can do that link. And then also the book. We put the link to the Amazon book if people want to do it. Is it fair to say that as a junior person, maybe as a lower enlisted and maybe as a junior officer, you're rightly focused because you're probably more in the kinetic end of things, that you're going to be doing that defense against the foreign, and then as you move up in rank, that your job becomes more and more guarding the individual liberties? I mean, it seems like there may be a bifurcation there, and that sort of it may be a spectrum that changes, and you kind of move from, as rank goes up, you might have to get more and more aware of the fact that you're probably going to be Pentagon based, or you're going to be shoreside command based in a lot of places.
Well, if there is a bifurcation, I think it's an inappropriate one.
Okay.
Every single individual took that oath. Every single individual has an equal responsibility to defend against foreign and domestic enemies. And so every single person has a responsibility to put that into practice. If you've seen the video of Senior Airman Lance Castle,
of course,
getting attacked, those individuals who did that were trampling upon his rights, and were doing so based on a lawless agenda, based on actual violations of the law. And so, from the lowest ranks to the highest ranks, we have the same obligations there. Now, as the senior ranks go, you get more strategic, both against the foreign enemy and the domestic enemy, is the way it should be. It should be the ideal. And you're strategic in thought. You're thinking through, much greater campaign plans and things that we have to put in place to ensure that we're putting the right deterrence in place for foreign adversaries. But we have ignored deterring the encroachment into individual rights, and it's been going on for a very long time, decades. And it's not just a military problem; it's across society.
Your issue specifically, at least, came to a head underneath the COVID vaccine mandates. But didn't they kind of solve some of these problems with the anthrax lawsuits? Didn't some of that get addressed at some point? And then did we just forget it, or how did that happen?
Well, I forget it. Certainly, it certainly seems that way. So in 2001, they came out with mandates. It was roughly that time frame. There was a lawsuit filed afterwards, and then Doe v. Rumsfeld, the plaintiffs won in that case. Mm-hmm. And the ruling was, hey, DOD broke the law. In 2005, shortly afterwards, Congress put in place laws protecting service members from having to receive emergency, use authorized products, investigational new drugs, things like that. It's always been an inalienable right. Human beings have bodily autonomy rights. And without, going through, Fifth Amendment processes, we always retain those rights. So Congress, giving a statutory law, it's a lower level law. And certainly a good one to say, hey, you can't experiment on service members. But the principle has always been there. The constitutional principle, it has supremacy over the statutory laws that have been enacted by Congress. And so, you're in a situation where no one understands either of those things. The Department of Defense completely trampled both the statutory law and the constitutional rights in enacting the COVID-19 mandates. And so, yes, of course, they completely ignored, both what happened with anthrax and then the laws that were enacted afterwards by Congress to protect service members.
Did those laws lay out punishment for those who violated them? Is that part of the DOD statute that are protecting?
No, it doesn't lay out specific punishments, but it does lay out rights. Mm-hmm. It does state that service members have a right to accept or refuse an emergency use product. Emergency use products were the only things provided to service members, or any American actually. Now that we've gone and done the research, and so we've always had the right to refuse, and so trampling upon that right and demanding that you accept the government's decision on your personal risk for health risk, completely insane to me, but also a very clear violation of both statutory law and constitutional rights.
So my experience would be very different than yours as a guy who came in enlisted. I also came enlisted at 27. So when I remember going through basic, there was this sort of attitude. It's like, now you belong to the Department of the Air Force, son. Like, you might as well get it tattooed on your butt kind of thing. And I was like, no, I'm a grown man. I have all kinds of rights and you have no say in them. Like, that's not going to be the case. But for an 18-year-old who's getting very, formed in their mental thinking, that impacts them. So they think, I better ask before a tattoo, all these other kind of deals. Did the Department of the Navy sort of do that same sort of indoctrination, like you have less rights than a regular citizen? Do they put that mentality out there as those? I'm curious on the officer side as well, because the enlisted side, it's kind of like you better ask permission before you do anything. And, even just traveling outside of a certain radius, there's all kinds of restrictions that fall on you. But none of those are your personal bodily autonomy, as you just stated. But there is that attitude that it's like, well, you kind of signed up for this. You get whatever we send you. That's your job.
To a certain extent, that does happen. I mean, it's officer enlisted. It's everywhere. That, hey, you're government property. Hey, you have accepted certain restrictions. Yeah, it's completely wrong.
Yeah.
It's in defiance of the clear constitutional principles that we don't lay down our citizenship when we voluntarily join the service. And so yes, we do give up, certain freedoms. We retain all of our basic human rights, right? Our basic constitutional rights, we retain those. But you can be told, hey, you've got to wear this uniform. You've got to wear this unit patch. You have to cut your hair a certain way. We are giving up those basic freedoms in order to serve and potentially sacrifice on behalf of the security of the nation. What cannot happen though is that the government take everything away. The government use you as chattel property and assume that you have no rights. And so that is where where do you draw the line on what's permissible and what's not? It's far smarter people have been working on this for centuries, and there's UCMJ and there is legal precedent set, and those laws have been pretty well defined. The judicial precedence has been pretty well set, and yet in this particular case, and I demonstrated in the book, they have violated those basic lines in the sand that have been drawn by historical precedent, legal precedent, both statutory and constitutional rights. So they have gone way too far in assuming federal power over the individual, and it's forced thousands of us to stand up and say something about it.
Do you think that if there were statutory penalties laid out in some of these whistleblower protection laws, in some of the the rights to not take emergency use authorization drugs, would that have been a barrier that would have at least been a better stop sign or a flashing light on the stop sign that let these people not kind of trample over the individual liberties that were being trampled?
I absolutely do think that would help. Now, whether that's the right thing to do or not, I don't know. I'm beginning to be of the opinion that we have legislated ourselves to death. Mm-hmm. Right? There's 1,000 laws out there, and you can be walking across the street and breaking a certain law. And having been from the law enforcement side, I mean, you probably understand very well that you can use those kinds of things. Why never talk to police, right? I want my lawyer. That's what you say. Mm-hmm. Just because you can be entrapped into becoming the target of an investigation. Because you've, maybe broken 3 laws in the course of a day, you had no idea were on the books. So there are, thousands of laws. Like, you couldn't read the entire, all the titles of American statute in the course of a year. Like, you just couldn't sit down and do it. So, is it the right thing to do to dictate what all the penalties are for everything? Probably not. But the principle you're talking about, I think is absolutely something that we need to have. We need to have accountability. We need to have repercussions for people who break the law. And it's why we went and named the military admirals and generals who did, we do have evidence broke the law. It's why we named them in the Declaration of Military Accountability, which everybody can find on militaryaccountability.com or .net. It'll take you to the same spot. And it's why we laid out our plan to, since no one else is doing it, Congress isn't doing it, our own leaders aren't doing it, executive branch isn't doing it, we're going to hold them accountable ourselves. And so we lay two ways out that we're going to do it. For those of us who run for office, we're going to introduce legislation to reduce their retirement income to zero for those who are, have proven to break the law. And then for those who reach the authority to do so, we're talking Secretary of the Services or Secretary of Defense, we're going to recall these admirals and generals from retirement for court martials. So they'll get the full, proper judicial treatment. It's going to be fair. It's going to be, blind justice. We're going to do it right. But the point is to introduce that personal risk. So if you're going to make a decision to trample individual constitutional rights, you had better make sure that it is perfectly justified. It is moral. It is ethical, because our intention, and this is a long-term time horizon project, maybe it's going to take decades, but our intention is to make sure that there is an element of personal risk to those who are making those decisions, because historically that has not been the case. The people at that level, at the 3 and 4 star level, they've got to break some egregious law in some sort of personal behavioral issue for there to be any accountability. And that's we're not seeing that in any other aspect of legal precedents for these leaders.
You've gotten you kind of talked to us a little bit about the ongoing training. I think federal employees get the same thing as DOD when it comes to sexual assault and whistleblower and all this other kind of stuff. Do they ever talk about sort of like your responsibilities, the burden of command, like what your liabilities are when you engage in maybe executing an unlawful order? Have you ever had any specialized kind of discussions other than with your buddies? Is there any formal version of that?
They do a lot of training for those who are going to take command. It's a lot of training on the responsibilities, on accountability, on the authorities that you have. They do talk a lot. There's a lot of discussions, and there's a lot of training on legal as well. But what they're trained to do, unfortunately, is rely on the JAG. Ask JAG. Go to your JAG. The JAG is the Judge Advocate General. It's your legal officer. They have a legal license. They've been through law school, but they are officers in the military. And what we've seen, though, is that the JAG Corps, and I speak about this in the book, and I name the names, at least on the Navy side, Admiral Crandall, apparently very politicized. And what they did is they, without doing the legal due diligence on what their commanders wanted to do, what the administration asked them to do, without doing the legal due diligence, they just marched forward. And they, instead of trying to make sure that we were following the law, the JAG Corps circled the wagons to protect the commanders. And that's historically what they've done for a long time. They are there to make sure that if the commander wants to do something, they find a loophole for him to do it. They make sure that they find some way to protect him if it goes bad. But there, you've heard it said before, or I have certainly, they say, hey, I want to go do X. And he'll turn to the JAG and say, make sure this is legal. And the JAG Corps, the JAG officer, said what he hears is make this legal. And so that's the scenario, I believe, that played out in the last 3 to 4 years, especially with the COVID mandates.
So I guess the big question is why? Why push something that people had some, heels dug in on and were willing to lose their job over it, and were willing to, maybe even face a court martial, things like that. And they obviously, a lot of people got kicked out of the service over it. Why would they do that?
I try to figure that out, and I just can't. Right? Yeah. Like, why do we have sin in the world? Why? We're never going to solve all these things. There is an element of careerism, selfishness in all of this, and I'm still, I've written articles and I've written op-eds, and I'm trying to bring attention to a lot of the different things here that seem to provide evidence that not only are we, have we broken the law, but are continuing to dig our heels in and not like right these wrongs, not address this head on. That, hey, as an institution, military, we made a mistake. Let's fix this. So I've tried to bring in some evidence of the recruiting issues and why the betrayal of trust has gotten us to the situation where, we're 41,000 service members under target for recruiting in this coming year. So, I'll give you a couple examples, couple numbers. In the height of the pandemic, if you want to call it that, at the height of the fear, at least, we were 7,000. We had 7,000 gaps at sea on operational sea duty billets. So for all of our ships, 250 plus ships in total, we should have had 7,000 more people operating those ships. So they're undermanned, understaffed, under-equipped. And in the years since, that has ballooned to over 21,000 gaps at operational sea duty billets. So it's tripled. And when I bring this to our leaders' attention, they ignore it. They don't care. They'll pat themselves on the back. Oh, well, we've applied this additional amount of money to resources. We've pulled these great sailors from these other shore duty billets and we've made them recruiters. And I'm privy to some communication at the 3 and the 4-star level where they're congratulating themselves on the changes month to month and not looking at the drastic, horrible downturn that we've had that is not improving. And when you say, hey, maybe start with the 8,500 conscientious service members that you kicked out, try to offer them back pay, try to do something to bring them back in, rebuild trust that the American people can tell their kids, oh, hey, you know what? You could join the military because they will defend your rights and not just use you for some military industrial complex, war or something, right? They're not just going to risk your life in vain. And so, we have this situation where they're ignoring all of these warning signs and they're digging their heels in. So are they going to be, I think they're aware, and they're certainly aware that there's a problem, but there is no moral courage to do anything about it because I believe it's all careerism. I believe it's, especially at the 3 and the 4-star level, they're looking for board memberships afterwards. They're looking for lucrative deals. And we have a big problem with that in the military. And so, they just don't want to tip the apple cart.
Is it hubris? Is it pride, or is it a lack of humility that's going on there? If we're going to take this into the moral realm,
I can't speak to what's going on inside the minds and the consciences of anybody else. I mean, I can only speak for myself in those regards. I have a lot of hubris. I have a lot of pride and a lot of sin. So I can only focus on myself there. But there's certainly no acknowledgement of what's happened. There's no acknowledgement, even though we have federal courts who have ruled that the DOD and individual services have broken the law. They still won't acknowledge it. They still won't publicly say, hey, our bad, let's fix this. They're not, I think Congressman Gates in a recent hearing asked the Secretary of Defense, hey, you kicked these people out. Are you going to bring them back? Are you going to make any effort to bring them back? And his answers was simple, no, I will not. And so that's the situation we're in. It seems to be from the top down to dig heels in. And until we're willing to embrace the red, to focus on what was done wrong, to completely hotwash all of this, and then come up with solutions to rebuild trust, we're going to continue to have these problems.
It's interesting that you're pointing out what I think are the same problems that we saw at DOD, going obviously down to MySpace at the FBI. But the Durham report was sort of this outside influence coming in and investigating what happened with Trump and all these other kind of political things we saw that were in the background, in the vortex of this. And the thing that Durham said that was so disheartening to me, and I think so obvious, but it's also what you just said about institution over constitution, which I'm going to steal, by the way, because I love it. The thing that he said is that there was no law, there's no policy, there's no procedure that would have solved this problem. It was a values issue. And if we don't have federal agents and federal employees that respect the Constitution first and know that this is their responsibility, then we're never going to be able to legislate our way out of it. And I think you've said a lot of the same things, but all these different voices are saying the same thing from different angles, from different viewpoints, from different government agencies and departments. And so this is a federal government issue, it seems like. Here's where I'm very curious, and I don't know if you have any visibility to this, but I saw you call out Matthew Lohmeyer the other day, and we've had him on the show here. He talks a lot about cultural Marxism and its rot that it's done to the military. The one thing we know about Marxism is that it's a collectivist idea, which is to say the institution over the individual, which is a lot of what you've just said. Do you think there is a Marxist or a cultural Marxist, this sort of collective attitude that is driving some of this in the promotion structure? Does it come from the top down? Does it come from the bottom up? Is it all the time? Any thoughts that you have on that sort of subject, if you're comfortable?
Yeah, no, I'm not the expert on that. You mentioned that I called out Matt just for clarity's sake. It was a call out like, hey,
yeah, we should do something together.
Zulu.
Yeah,
this guy's he's got it. So Matt's great. We've chatted before, sure. And his book. That's where send everybody to that book, because that's the book that describes what's going on in the military with Marxism. So Irresistible Revolution. Check that out. Matt Lohmeyer does a great job in describing from his perspective what he's seen in terms of the Marxist influence in the military. And I can only echo, Matt, that yes, I've seen it too, certainly, where collective principles are placed over individual rights. And, at the senior ranks, it's going to be hard to decipher whether they're Marxists or whether they're, careerists and just want to go along with, whatever the latest narrative or agenda is from the top. But we certainly have a principles problem in the military, and based on Matt's research and Matt's experience, I would say yes, there is Marxist influence in a lot of that as well.
And so, in other words, you've seen some of this. I mean, you're obviously familiar with the story, and I wasn't trying to say you were calling about. I thought it was like a cool thing you were saying. Hey, we need to get together and teach some of these service academies about the things that we know are problems, and who better than people that have experienced them. Do you think that that's permeated the Navy as well? Is it across the board? It's not just unique to Air Force, Space Force, which is, a little different animal than some of the other fighting forces.
Yeah, it's certainly across the board. The same leadership cultural problems we have are, DOD wide right now. And I will say, for the institution versus the Constitution, you mentioned that and stealing it, and please spread it around. Check out and maybe have people go check out my latest article at Real Clear Defense. It's the institution or the Constitution, unraveling the COVID-19 mandates for the Joint Force. In that, I wrote that with Vice Admiral Dean Lee. He's a retired 3-star Coast Guard admiral. And, we've had no help from any active duty admiral general to help, fight for constitutional rights. And, because they circled the wagons around the institution, right? A few of the retired admirals and generals took, great personal risk. They lost friends over it, but they have come to our aid from a strategic leadership perspective and have joined in the fight. And I certainly, talking about calling out people, I certainly want to mention Vice Admiral Dean Lee. I hope, if you have me on again, I'll see if he'll come and join us, because he got a lot of wisdom. He's a great Christian guy. And he understands this fight in a way that many people don't.
Let's pivot a little bit to the values thing and specifically COVID-19. I want to go to prior to the mandates. I want to go to what you saw and what you perceived personally. So this is obviously not representing anything that's happening on the force wide, but what did you, a man, a father, a husband, Catholic, see in, let's say, January to June of 2020 as we're hearing the so-called pandemic and it's rolling out? And you're in what, Rhode Island at the time? Is that right?
Rhode Island.
Okay, so you're East Coast. I was in Virginia, so I was outside of DC. What were you seeing and what were you perceiving? News? What were you taking that and digesting, and what were you saying, what was true and what was not in your mind?
Yeah, I spoke a little bit about this in the book. At first, you don't know what to expect. I mean, there is a lot of fear. There's a lot of, hey, what is this thing? Is it going to kill 75% of the world's population? Like, we have no idea. It did not take me long. You could count the days on one hand, the number of days where it took me to realize that hey, this isn't going to be what they say it is. This fear mongering does not seem to be accurate. And what made me realize that is, for the most part, and this is a principles issue, I try to see things in the world from a spiritual warfare perspective. And so from that perspective, I'm watching who has values that are more similar to mine, who puts their spiritual life first, and who's, living some different values, whatever those values are, hedonistic or something else, right? Or, anti-God, anti-authority, anti-whatever. I mean, I could just be naming all the bad things, but I'm not going to. So I'm looking at the differences, and for the people that go on, were making media appearances during that early time in the pandemic, it was the people who most had my values, kind of an eternal outlook, believed in God, believed in heaven and hell, who were offering caution, who were saying, let's wait and see, let's take care of people, let's try to do things right, but we don't need this fear, right? And for me and my wife, as we were navigating all this, we said, hey, if we're taken, we're taken, but we're going to put God first. We're not going to live in fear. We believe that if we die in the state of grace, we're going to have eventually get to heaven. So that was our perspective. The folks who were most clamoring for fear, the folks, who apparently, don't believe in God, don't believe in heaven and hell, and they're grasping desperately for this life because they don't believe in an afterlife. It doesn't appear that way. It's the same people who clamor for a so-called right to, kill their children in the womb. Those were the people using language like, if it just saves one life, if it just saves one life, we need to do all these tons of mitigation measures. And the disparate application of saving one life blew my mind, and it opened my eyes to how ludicrous this whole thing was for me, right? And so, I'm a pro-life Catholic, and if it just saves one life, there are hundreds of thousands of different ways we could apply federal dollars, or not send $100 billion to Ukraine or whatever, that we could develop programs to just save one life, right? For the unborn.
And by the way, your bodily autonomy be damned on that one. God forbid. It's like the people, I don't know, the amusement of the ideas that must run into each other at full speed. It was complete for me in 2020. I don't know if you saw the same thing. It's like, how strong is that cognitive dissonance that you're saying, yeah, just one life, and we must infringe on all your civil liberties as you walk around. By the way, we still really want to kill babies all the way up to the point after they're born because they're really inconvenient. It's such a strange position to try to stake out. There's no intellectual honesty whatsoever. So you were seeing that. What about the death count? Did you see the death count on the TVs that were running? But out of curiosity, what TVs are on? Almost all offices I see these days that are government have a news feed of some kind piped in somewhere. What television programs were being watched in the places that you were working?
It's mostly like MSNBC or CNN. Because of the language used nowadays, folks were, even if they were a more conservative person and they preferred Fox News. And by the way, at this point, I believe it's all, uniparty, backing for globalist agendas, right? I, even when you get to what I previously considered, kind of far right networks that aren't mainstream, I'm still researching the money behind it because I don't trust it. So, you got to go to places like this. You got to go to your show.
Just two guys
individual
talking.
Podcasters who have independence, right?
That's right.
That's where you got to go to try to get, independent sources. And I don't care if you're left leaning or right leaning or whatever. I just don't trust the money behind it, and none of those people should either. Go find individual people. So anyway, yes, the My Body, My Choice thing was crazy. Because it meant one thing for certain people and another thing for other people. And then when you got to the death counts, and I'm glad you brought that up, it started with death rates.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what blew my mind. And I wrote about this in the book. I think the chapter was Pandemic of Fear. It might be chapter 4 in the book. But when the death rates, they were a little higher up front. And there are some reasons, I think, that death rates, and this is not the podcast, nor am I the expert to get into it, but, remdesivir protocols and no antibacterials for people with post-COVID pneumonia. Like, are you kidding me? Like those kinds of things when it has a chance.
Yeah, they just threw out all normal medical treatment. They were like, don't come in unless you're dying. And when you're dying, then we're going to intubate you, which is the one way we take away your airway, and we put you on these sedatives. So we relax all your diaphragm and we're going to take over. Like, what? You never do that. You always support respiration. I'm a paramedic, so I did that for a decade. I can speak a little bit to it, but it's like, you always support the lowest level of intervention is normal. And they went like, nope. We're just going to do weird stuff right off the gate. It looked really weird for me. I'm sure you saw the same.
Oh, yeah. We're talking, just to be clear for all your audience, we're talking about institutionally encouraged and then mandated murder. And anyway, so the death counts were a little higher up front. And as the death counts started, going lower, they switched to the death rates. The death rates were higher initially. And as the death rates compared to people who, got the virus and started recovering and, certain good doctors are trying to do the right thing, those rates started to lower. So the fear mongers and the people, I'll say it again, the globalist agenda, uniparty paid, whatever, they shifted to cumulative death counts. And it was just to make people like, oh man, another 100,000 people died. But you do have the motorcycle accidents came in, and the hospitals got money. They had to test for COVID because there's money behind testing for COVID, and then there's money behind getting a positive. And of course, for a death, there's more money for that. So, it's a mess. I'm not the expert on it. There are books out there about it, but that is certainly what we saw early on. And what, my wife and I, the decision was, we're not going to do any of this. We're not going to hide the image of God that we've been given our faces. My wife never wore a mask. My children never wore one. They never saw me wear one. And so, to my shame, I compromised on that element, for a little while. And then eventually, I'm never going to do that kind of thing again. I did refuse all COVID testing, and that was part of why I ultimately got fired and then exiled. So it was not just refusing the vaccine, but refusing testing and refusing some of those other protocols. So got banned from my building for a while. That was fun. But my wife is the truly courageous person behind all this. She was the one kind of pushing me, like, into this fight. She was, getting, dressed down and standing down grocery store managers and things like that, in front of all the kids. Like, right. She's the one with true courage. So she actually, she tells this story in she's been invited to do a podcast with Feds for Freedom. Yep. And she tells a story of when she, turned to me and called me a coward. So I had to dig in deep.
Yeah, well, there's some interesting sort of commonalities there that you and I share, because I also refused those COVID tests, and they told me every 72 hours. And I was like, I'm not outing myself that way to everybody else. It's none of their business. But also, and I was kicked out of my building. Did you get AWOL? Did they put you on AWOL at all for that?
No, but I had a lot of service members who were reaching out. So there was tons of us trying to protect others.
Right.
And service members were reaching out to us with that exact issue.
That's what they did to my federal service. And you're going like, I'm not AWOL. I showed up. You told me to go home because they wouldn't let me in the building. Like, what are you a-holes doing? That's not real.
Standing in the heat of the day, out there outside the building, because they can't go in. I mean, this poor young lady, she was a dentist, and she wouldn't do the test. And so they eventually started trying to call her AWOL. Then they started talking about sending her to behavioral health because she must be crazy for not
right.
Yeah, like that kind of stuff. So she actually reached out to me, and I wrote about this in the book. She reached out to me and said, I'm very concerned that they're going to force me into behavioral health and then force medicate me with stuff.
Yeah.
And so there was some of that going on in the military, and you saw some of that, in the video with Lance Castle, like that they were.
What did they hit him? Do you know what they injected him with? Was that a sedative?
No, so I don't think he got forcibly injected with anything. Now he and I haven't had a chance to talk
I saw
yet.
it in the video. They injected him with something.
Okay, then that's that.
It's in the video that we've shared.
That.
You can, so here's the thing. I got an eye for this sort of thing. It's like, sedating a patient is something you do when they're combative sometimes. And so hitting them with a benzo or something like that to drop them down a level. People do that for excited delirium. There's all these different protocols. But I watched them. The dog pile happened on arms and legs, which is where you go first. Then they controlled his torso, and somebody injected him with something, but we don't know what. So I don't know. Maybe I can talk to him. I also wonder if I ran across him at some point in time in my Air Force career, because he looks really familiar. He's got that kind of face that looks familiar, but it would not surprise me that because of the way that I feel like God has been moving in a lot of this, that I've just run across people that I have no business having any common connection to. I want to ask the difficult question. How did your church respond? How was your faith community responding to this in the Northeast? Because I saw a lot of them do the opposite of courage, and I'm curious if yours was the same.
Yeah, that is the first time I've been asked that question. It is the toughest one. We were at a fraternity parish in the Diocese of Richmond, which is how I first heard of your work and heard your name. Which, thank you, by the way, for your courage. And so that's where we were before the pandemic. In 2019, I got moved up to Rhode Island, and I was not at the fraternity parish in Richmond, in where we were, in the Virginia Beach area. But I've heard it could have been done better. And what I will say though is I thank God for the sake of my faith, personally, He had us move to where we were, because we had a diocesan priest who offered the traditional Latin Mass. Very courageous guy. You can go find him. He's at iPadre, I think, on Twitter.
Nice.
Great, fantastic. He is a spiritual father, a wonderful man, very courageous. The kind of person who would offer secret masses, the kind of person who never enforced anything that violated people's consciences. And we were there in that environment with that kind of leader, and that helped get me and my family through the pandemic without feelings of betrayal. I mean, we're talking people who believe like us. We believe in eternal life, right? And so if we're so desperately grasping for this life, we have something missing. And if you're willing to go along, especially with lies, when you realize that, hey, the mask was a lie.
There's no way it could ever work. You've been through Sea Bernie training, I'm sure of it. Everybody gets a little taste of it. Yep. We all know what a mop level 4 looks like, and even that's not guaranteed to save you. And it's duct taping yourself to all the different barriers, and you're going to put over a piece of bandana. I always tell people, because it's just so easy, but it's like, you ever been in an elevator and smelled a fart? Like that went through somebody's underwear and their jeans and then into your face. You think a bandana is going to do something to a virus? Like, come on, what are we doing here? It's so silly and sad. So the
molecule size is very different.
Oh, of course. It's so simple. I mean, just a basic understanding of size. I told somebody that I was also going to erect a chain link fence in my backyard to keep the mosquitoes out, because that's the same mentality when it comes to actual sizing. But your church actually stood together. See, how many people do you think experienced a priest that said, our forefathers in faith would have died over this? They offered masses in the catacombs around the stinking corpses in order to continue to celebrate when it was outlawed. And then other people, just like my church, they just shut it down. Oh, nobody in the cry room. It's dangerous. And you're like, I got crying little kid. I got these little people. They're not going to be able to do this. And they're certainly not going to wear a mask, and they shut it down.
I will say for a lot of those churches, the fear was not of the virus, like because especially for these traditionally leaning Orthodox believing I'm Catholic, right? Catholic churches, the fear wasn't of the virus. The fear was of getting shut down by the bishop,
right? Or by the local health authorities or whatever was going to come in, some government intervention,
right?
Which is still fear of man.
Yes. So my issue with it all is it is a fear-based decision, and we're called to act in courage. And so, there's prudence there too. So I have tried much more recently to not judge as best as possible the prudential decisions of others who actually have authority over the church. I only have authority, in my own family and over my own body. And so, I don't want to second guess other people's decisions about prudence. I will just say that had I been there at the time and at my level of spiritual maturity, it might have been very dangerous to my faith. And so God had moved me somewhere else. And I got somebody who had much more of our style of, fighting back, I guess. So, but God works those ways. He knows people's strengths and weaknesses, and everybody has what they need. So,
Yeah, it's quite interesting to me. Our faith journey was that my wife was coming into the Catholic Church at that point in time and had been raised without religion, and so we saw them shut this down. We went to New Mexico. New Mexico was actually more open than Virginia. That doesn't make any sense because New Mexico is very left-leaning and very blue, and you just go like, wait, what? But all of that ended up kind of driving us hard into it. It's like, okay, well, we're only going to accept sort of intensity now. It's got to be full bore. And then, of course, every once in a while, God will put you to a decision for all your chips, which you've been in that fight. Let's talk about setting that red line. I always say prepare, repair. You probably heard me say it in the ad reads, but I think that affects both our spiritual life, our financial life, our physical life, our fitness. But being able to do it with your faith and being able to do it with your values, because if you don't know what your stance is on a challenge and you get challenged, oftentimes you will falter. That's the reason why we do basic trainings. That's why we do stress inoculations for military training. You want to talk about some of that mentality and maybe how many people lost ground during that time because they hadn't had that chance. Most of us didn't know it was coming. I think that's fair.
Yeah, so I like to talk about it as a fifth generation war. It's a spiritual war. It's a fifth generation war. Those are not exactly the same things, but there's significant overlap.
Sure.
And so if you are in a fifth generation war, it's a war for hearts and minds. The spiritual war, very similar. It's a war for your heart, mind, your soul. If you are encouraged to go along with a lie, and then you compromise on that lie, you are ceding ground in the fifth generation warfare. You're ceding ground in your own spiritual war, right? You're gonna compromise on something that you know to be true, and the mask is a good example. And I'll tell a couple stories. Like there was a recruit for the Navy who I got to talk to, 9 months after this actually went down. He had joined the delay entry program for the Navy. The mandate came out. So it was during pandemic, but before mandate comes out, he calls his detailers and say, hey, I can't take this thing. I'm not going to do it. Can I go ahead and put a religious accommodation in now before I show up? And of course, like recruiters, they do anything they can to make sure they get the body, keep doing, hitting their quotas. Like, oh, you'll be good. You'll be fine. Government needs you, you can take care of it when you get here. So he shows up, and he and a group of folks who don't want to do it after the mandate are in the, basic training at boot camp, and they're isolated. They do their quarantine thing. There's tape on the ground, like 8-foot squares. They've got to stay in. They're given 1 hour of outside daylight in the course of 2 weeks. And then they're repeatedly, this is like straight from Russian gulag or some crazy, they bring them repeatedly in front of the medical professionals and their leadership, and they're harassed. They're told, you're the ones killing grandma. They verbally abuse them. It's psychological abuse. And almost everybody in his boot camp class eventually caved and eventually went along with this, and like, this is too much, and they took the shot or they left. And he said, no, I'm going to serve. I want to stay in. So he fought. He kept asking to see a chaplain, not even knowing that the chaplain visit in the Navy is the very first thing you do to start your religious accommodation process. They wouldn't even let him start the request for a religious accommodation, and they kept verbally abusing him. So he served. His name's Owen. He served 39 days honorably in the United States Navy before they ultimately kicked him out. And I tell people, what he did in standing up for his conscience, he won his fifth generation warfare battle. We're all going to face him. Owen won his, and he left boot camp honorably, and he served honorably for 39 days. And I'll tell you, he served much more honorably than a significant number of our admirals and generals who have served almost that number in years, because they have compromised for a career, and Owen did not. And so that's the level of decision. That's the level of fight we're going to have to take to win back our constitutional rights. For my own story, my wife and I made the decision, when they were threatening court martials and we were starting to see people kicked out and getting on their DD-214s, that's your exit, paperwork from the military, commission of a serious offense. We typically reserve that for assaults and armed robberies and things like that. It's very serious offenses. And you put the threat of court martial together with that, it can come with jail time. And so we made the decision that, when they were threatening court martials, that I'm going to go to jail before I go and violate my conscience and go get this biological agent injected into my body. And so we even built a plan. Like I, called my parents, hey, we're going to, we'll send my wife and my kids. They're going to come down and live with you. I'll serve my time in prison, and then I'll get out and, swing hammers and dig ditches or whatever. Like, that's the level of decision that we made together as a couple. And it wasn't a hard one. It was a 5-minute conversation. Like, okay, how far are we willing to go for what we believe in? You mentioned the martyrs earlier. You mentioned, mass in the catacombs. If we don't get back to that level of uncompromising faith and met with action, then the country's going to fail. But more importantly, the individual in their fight for their eternal soul, that is what's most at risk, and that's what everybody should be most concerned about.
You've mentioned it twice now, so I'm gonna hone in on it. The critical importance of a united household, of a spouse that's willing to push as hard or harder than you will. I had the same experience with my wife. I came to her at one point. I was like, did I miss the thread? Because you always got to ask yourself, unless you're a sociopath, right? Am I just completely missing what's going on here? If I'm the odd man out, is it me? Am I the problem? Or am I really the one guy standing against the many saying that everybody else is, yes, you are all wrong? And I came to my wife and I said, should I just get the shot? Is that the right answer? Do we just get it and just suck it up and then retire? And she was like, absolutely not. Like, under no circumstances. You'll figure it out. Like you said, swing a hammer, dig ditches. I actually prefer that to a lot of the work that I've done in my life. I find that very meaningful to use my hands. So that was kind of it's like, okay. But the critical piece is you got to have that brain trust, that backstop of a spouse or close friends or whatever it is in people's lives. Will you talk about maybe what set your marriage up for this sort of test? Because for a lot of people, it's a test. For you, a 5-minute conversation, that was about the same with mine. It's like, no. And it's like, oh, okay, good. We're on the same page then. Good. How did you set your marriage up for that success? Obviously, you didn't know it was coming for you, but it was.
We were aligned spiritually from early on. Now, in our marriage, I'm probably the weaker one, frankly. She is deep strength and maybe a lot more aggression too. When she has a feeling about what's right and wrong, she will go on offense. So a lot of what I have done in projecting is it's really from her. So I think the setup is that you got to be aligned spiritually with your goals and for your family and spiritual life. But if you're not communicating and you're not aligned on the important things, then it's going to be much harder. Not impossible. I do know one Air Force 06 who made it through. He was part of our kind of inner circle fighting back at the strategic level in the military. And there's a group of us. You'll see a lot of those names on, as signatures on the Declaration of Military Accountability. But in the case of this one Air Force officer, his wife was completely opposed to his stance. And to see the drain on him trying to lead, trying to make a decision for himself, and then not having the support at home, it can be devastating. Their marriage has survived that. So it's not impossible.
But that's a two-front war. That's a lot harder.
I can't imagine. I told him before, like I just can't imagine having fought that without my wife sitting there using me as the body, the body shield to push me into the fight. I'm just kidding.
That's our job, though. That is our role. So I've talked to Mark Hout. You may, probably know who he is, and
I have met him.
Yeah,
I handed him a copy of the book. I
Yeah.
was so honored to meet him.
He's a really good guy, and one of the things he talks about is sort of the role of men, which I think has been lost with the sort of weak culture that we have because we keep pushing weakness. But he says men's job are leader, protector, and provider, and I think that breaks down something. I mean, we all have different words for the same sort of thing. But yeah, your job, if you're going to be the protector, that means you are the human shield, and your wife is supposed to push you out there and be like, hey, go solve this problem. The world is coming for us. Get to the front of the cave. It is your job to make sure that the ones behind you, they don't see what happens out there. That's where men are supposed to go, into the fight. That's why we sign up for the military, I think.
Yeah, I love that analogy. That is great. I might have to steal that.
Take it. It's yours. I'll tell you, this is real simple. When I was deciding to enlist at 27, it's later than most. You commissioned at probably, 22 years old, something like that?
Yeah, right around there.
So I got 5 more years of being dumb, retarded, as my chat likes me to say, because I grew up in the 80s, and you just say these kind of things. It's like, yeah, I was foolish. And I started reflecting on my life. It's like, what would my role be in society 10,000 years ago? Where would I be? And my job would be hunting buffalo and laying out in the grass for 3 days to be able to bring down food, or standing out there in front of an enemy tribe and making sure they don't come for my people in the village. So when I put myself in sort of a very simple world, that was my thought. And it's the same role when you become a father, because now you got a little tribe. You got a big tribe, actually. You got a pretty good sized tribe back there.
Yeah,
it's your job to be at the mouth of the cave to make sure that the little one's behind you and show your sons what it looks like. And soon they stand shoulder to shoulder, and now you got even a bigger front, right? But if we're not doing that, are we even doing our job as men? And so I love that Mark Houck always puts that out there, because that's how you go after the DOD. That's how you go after the DOJ and stand in the way and say, no. You're Gandalf on the bridge, hitting the staff. You shall not pass. This is where I stand. I may go down into the gap too. That's the other piece. A lot of us, are going to get dragged for a while. But I appreciate that. It talks about this. So we have this little badge. You've probably seen this. We're going to get you one of them. If it's all right with you, I'll send it to you. You can wear it or not, but you can have it for sure. It's a sign of white martyrdom is really what we're talking about here. And you want to kind of discuss the concept of the white martyrs and the red martyrs. Are you familiar with that sort of that framing of the world? Because I think a lot of people, every time I say it, they go like, man, I never heard it. It's like, well, a lot of people know. Let's talk about white martyrdom.
Yeah, so you certainly can speak to it better than I can, but it's a St. Maximilian Kolbe kind of thing, right? The white martyrdom, where you're not going to necessarily be killed. You're not shedding your blood for your faith, but you're going to endure significant harassment, struggle. People are going to come for you, make this hard. You mentioned Mark Houck. He talks about, he realized in the course of, him getting shackled and dragged around and humiliated, for protecting his son, because he was of the wrong persuasion on a political issue, because he stood for life. That it was the process was the punishment. That's what he described in the talk I heard with him when I had the honor of meeting him. That's the white martyrdom. Now, are we also going to, like St. Maximilian Kolbe, get the crown of red martyrdom? I don't know. That's left to be seen. But if we don't take that stand you're talking about, I love the analogy. If we don't get to the front of the cave, the enemy's going to get in the cave, and the chances are much greater. So we've got to take that stand. We've got to endure whatever the white martyrdom is for now, and be willing to make it red if we're going to have any chance of keeping this country what it was passed down to us as.
I want to be respectful of your time and give you time because I know you got another meeting coming up here. Let's talk about just the last thing, the cost, because there is a cost professionally, personally. There's a spiritual cost because it's just a heavy weight to carry. But can you talk about some of those things a little bit, and then we'll plug the book and we'll show people where they can get all that kind of stuff. But the cost is not nothing.
It's not nothing, but it's insignificant in terms of eternal rewards. I mean, you've probably heard of Pascal's wager, right? You make a temporal wager of some of your time in order to potentially get an eternal reward. Any cost we pay in that environment is minuscule. But I will say, for me personally, I mean, I had a command opportunity taken from me. I had a year-long in-residence war college opportunity. I was going to get another master's degree. I was already slated for it. That got taken. My exile of 7 months, I told only to call in as my only duty. Did that for 3 weeks. I stopped taking the call. It's pretty isolating. It's meant to be some form of psychological warfare. But all of that is minimal compared to what other people went through. There was at least one court martial. Just learned about another one with Senior Airman Castle. People went through devastating things, and one Navy SEAL stood up for his own rights, and he refused to take the shot. He got isolated with other SEALs. They were given menial labor, doing yard work, stuff like that. They weren't allowed. They had their badge access to their unit building taken away. They had to get escorted when they were told to come in to do urinalysis drug tests, like a foreign visitor or something. Like it's insane. That one of those Navy SEALs, his first name is Danny. He was found as a suicide, early in September after the mandate. And I was told by one of his teammates, one of the other Navy SEALs, shortly after that the very last thing that Danny did, and for the last service he performed for his country, was yard work outside the building he was no longer allowed to enter. So the cost is significant, and our leaders need to start by acknowledging it and studying this and making sure that they put in place things that ensure this never happens again. So for everything that your listeners, your viewers have endured in this fight, or whether they went along with this, this is the opportunity for us to join and stand up for individual rights, because if we don't, we're going to lose it. So the cost is tiny, but the reward here is potentially infinite.
Very well said. And I wanted to pivot that to your military accountability. This is the document, folks. Do you want to kind of talk people through that, Rob? Just kind of let them know what the structure was, why you guys did it. Folks, you can go to the website. It's actually in the show notes. It's very easy to find, but I wanted you to get a visual of it. It's not a graphic website. It is a text-based, message-first type website. It's almost all text, and it's dense. It looks like, kind of like some famous documents people may have seen in history.
Yeah, sorry guys, you're going to have to do a little reading if you really want to get into it. But so the book had come out July 4th, 2023, and I thought for sure, every time I've written something, I started writing in October of 2021, written mutiny complaints against admirals and filing anything I could do, firing off emails, and I fought with the pen as best I could. And so kept escalating, and ultimately it ended up being the book. And I realized that they're ignoring the book. They're going to continue to ignore us. They sidelined us because they don't want to deal with the underlying issues. They don't have a discussion on the merits. So I realized that they were going to, even though I called out names in the book as an active duty 05, calling out my admirals, it's crazy they would ignore this. So I ultimately said, hey, we got to go on the offensive. And so this is me. I spent a couple of weeks writing a first draft of that, kind of honing it. I want to make sure, we talked earlier about it, injecting some personal risk, trying to ensure we have accountability. And then ultimately, we got some other folks, kind of our strategic thinkers together. They helped hone the words. We got it down to one page, and then went public with it. Brad Miller, he was the one who, we said, hey, it's probably best coming from him because he's not active duty. And we sent it to the active members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So probably not best coming from me.
Yeah.
But so Brad sent that off, and it got 4-something million views shortly after. So it resonated with folks. So go check it out, the Declaration of Military Accountability. And it's us going on offensive as best we can because, going to the American people, because they're ignoring us. They don't want to hear what we have to say.
I like hearing your little one in the background that's simulating a raid on your house by the sergeants at arms. No, this is what my house sounds like all the time too. And there's something kind of comforting about knowing that there's little people running around. That's what this is about, I assume, right? It's about the next generation, because I think ours is probably not going to be able to save it in entirety, but maybe throwing ourselves into the breach is what lets your little ones who are out there, banging on the door, trying to get in and see what dad's up to.
Yeah.
Maybe they get a little better slice, because it doesn't seem like we've kind of lost some of the major principles in this country over the last 20 or 30 years.
We have. We've gone from being, centered on principles to centered on selfishness, and then, now ultimately flat out untruths. and we're expected to, vocally support people's, fantasies of things that aren't true. And so, yeah, we've got to get back to true principles if we're going to have any hope. And it'll, like we said earlier in the show, it took us a long time to get here. It's been a long, slow drag. It's accelerated certainly in the last, 5-10 years. But it won't be a massive swing back really quick. I don't think. I think it's going to take us a long time. It'll be our kids, and our grandkids, I think, who are going to have to reestablish our country with proper principles.
Your Twitter says Rob Green 1010. What's the 1010? Is that a thing?
Yeah, my 10 was my favorite number playing baseball in high school.
Okay.
But 10 was taken. Rob Green 10 was taken. And so Brad Miller has Brad Miller 1010. He does that because it's birthday. But I was like, I'm going to emulate him because I look up to him and he's a great guy. So that's why Rob Green 1010.
I love it. All right, I'm going to throw it on the screen right here, folks. So you're looking at the right one. It's got a picture of the book in the icon. If you're watching us on Rumble or if you're seeing us over on Twitter, you guys can follow Rob at Rob Green 1010, and that is the bio page you'll see there. I love the where's that image of the cross? What is that, a chapel somewhere?
Yeah, that's the Porticola in Franciscan University, right there. So
it's really neat.
A lot of time praying there.
I went to a Cistercian school when I was in 5th and 6th grade, and they had this incredible stone chapel that they had somehow built out of like this enormous pieces of limestone, and then they did glass block and then a cedar roof, and it looked like the roof was levitating above you as you sat in there. But it was so simple; it was just a rectangle, and they would do Gregorian chant there, and that kind of gives me that vibe, that kind of like a place of actual sacred, which a lot of these churches now, they look more like they were built in the 70s. They don't have that spirit to them.
Yeah, well, that one's modeled after the one that St. Francis built by hand, and so it's meant to be a replica of that. So it's very small. It's the stones looked like they were dragged over and constructed. So I will say, if you go find me on social media, be patient with me. I'm brand new to it. I swore I would never get on social media, but I've been encouraged to, and so we'll learn together, I guess. So all those who follow me,
it is a necessary sacrifice. I go on there all the time now, and I spend a lot of time doing it. But I had a supervisor who's like, "You used to make fun of people on social media." I was like, "Yeah, I still do. I still make fun of it. It's a cesspool." So I told people in the show notes, if they want to follow you on the cesspool of Twitter, they can do so. And I put the link in there. I think you'll probably appreciate that. There's nothing good about it. Rob, thanks so much for joining me today and sharing your sort of experience. But also, I want to encourage people to go and follow that book. And I want to wish you really good luck, because, man, if somebody's not standing up there in all these different forums, this is the fight, it turns out, for our generation. Who knew? After 20 years of war, this is actually the fight at the home front, huh?
Yeah, it's a domestic enemy we've got to combat. And I just want to thank you. Thank you for using this platform to fight for individual liberty, to fight for those principles and values. I mean, this is fantastic. I'm so honored to have an opportunity to talk with you. Honor's all mine. I enjoyed it. We'll talk offline, and we'll get you one of these pins if you want it. Then, if nothing else, you can give it to your wife, and she can wear it around, because it sounds like she also earned one. Thanks for joining me today, buddy, and good luck on the rest of your day. Yeah, thanks. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, that is it. That is the show for today. I want to go ahead and say thanks to our affiliates that also support the program. And interestingly enough, MadHatJerky.com/Kyle, promo code Kyle, 20% off. Mad Hat Jerky, their marketing guy, who's one of our listeners, he used to teach at the high school that I went to in Dallas. And he said that I am proof that something good can come from that high school. There's a lot of good things that came out of there, but kind of fun. Guys, go to Matt Hat Jerky. It's Matt with 2 T's, hat with 1 T, jerky.com. Fantastic jerky. I'm working my way through. I don't know if you guys do the same thing. I always eat the things that I don't like first, or I don't like as much. I'm saving the gourmet flank. This is the spicy ones. I'm saving the gourmet flank, black truffle, and garlic. Those are my 2 favorites. Guys, check them out, and you'll get a high quality snack that's got a lot of protein in it. It's easy to carry around with you. It lasts for a good while, but it is an edible thing. It's not something you save forever like some of our other sponsors. MattHatJerky.com/Kyle. The promo code Kyle will save you 20%. And then the same story over there at Mike Lindell's. They've got some kind of a conference call coming up, thanking all the folks that are promoting their website. It's mypillow.com. That will not be surprising to you. Always fighting for the conservative causes, but mypillow.com/Kyle. And you can use the promo code Kyle to save up to 50% on towels and on sheets and on slippers like my buddy Alpha loves to wear. I don't know what the story is. I don't know how slippers go with people who make towels and pillows, but it is a thing.
And they do it in Minnesota. Check them out, mypillow.com/Kyle, if you guys want to support the show, if you are in the market for such things. And then last but not least, one of you in the chat, and the name slipped my mind, so I'm sorry about that. I don't know who said it, but they said, man, that is a really cool shirt that is in the thumbnail. That is from thesuspendables.com. It is the merch store for the Suspendable crew. You can buy your own version of the pin. It is the white one. The black ones are only handed out. These ones are for sale. You guys can get 3 of them for $30. If you want to hit up the O'Boyle Family Sweatshop, there's less sweating when it comes to just shipping those out. And you'll see there is the rifle right on the screen with me, the rifle and the quill. Just like Rob was talking about, that the pen is mightier than the sword for now. Whenever we can use it. We want to do that sort of thing. Use promo code Kyle to save 10% at the website, the-suspendables.com. You'll find all these links in the show description. Very easy to do. And you can find it. You're looking for the Night Ops versions, which are like that kind of cool, very high resolution green on black. That was the shirt, for those of you who didn't see our thumbnail. Anyway, support them, support the O'Boyles, support all of our sponsors if you guys like. This show is brought to you by that, but make sure you have subscribed on Rumble. If you are not already, go over and hit the follow button, do it on a computer, and then you can hit the subscription button. It's $5 a month, and you will be supporting our program. It's brought to you by Catholic Vote, by 4Patriots, by PatriotCoolers.com, Matt Hat Jerky, and MyPillow. All those folks always use the promo code Kyle, Kyle. We keep it simple. And you can follow us at rumble.com/Kyle Seraphin or on all social medias at Kyle Seraphin. I just keep it simple. I don't know. It's my name. It's very easy to do, y'all. Let's do this real quick, too. Last thing, there's a couple of cool pictures of Commander Rob Green. I'll do it while he's off the screen so he is not liable for anything. These are public domain photos, but there he is swearing in and carrying one of his kiddos with a Catholic priest, a man who's living by it. I'm also encourage you guys to check out today's loop because it does have that. This is the article that I wrote, and you'll find out that the first sentence talks about betrayal, which we just discussed. Me and Rob organically coming to the same problem. Betrayal within these agencies, totally worth your time. So check those things out. All the links in the description. Folks, we will see you again tomorrow for a Friendly Friday. Thanks for joining us for this long-form conversation. I really enjoy doing these. And what a cool guy. Follow Rob at RobGreen1010. We'll see you again in the morning. God bless you, and see you then.
Thanks for listening to the Kyle Seraphin Show, streamed live weekdays on rumble.com/Kyle Seraphin. Follow Kyle on Twitter, Truth Social, and Instagram at Kyle Seraphin.